Hello, welcome to another CQPweb tutorial. In this video I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the file metadata screen, which if you've watched other tutorials in this series you will already have encountered it, but I'll go through it again in a little bit more detail in this video. Okay, so if we start from a concordance, this is a concordance in the Early English Books Online corpus. It could have been any corpus, that's the one I picked for this demonstration. When you're in a concordance, as explained in previous video tutorials, you can hover over these links here which specify what file a particular concordance hit has come from, and then a small blue box pops up there with some metadata about the texts. But you can also click on the link to take you to the text metadata display, which is the main thing that I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, the actual display itself is really simple, and there's not a lot to say about it. You have simply, for every text, you have a series of items of information down here, and then whatever the value of these items of information for this particular text in the corpus, you can see it here. So, for instance, we can see that the author, that's the item of information here, and the value of that item of information is this string that we have here. Robert Jenkin, whoever Robert Jenkin is. I'm not a specialist in 17th century, 18th century literature. So it's a really simple display. Let's think, however, about what this actually represents in terms of how CQPweb works. There are a couple of things that will always be here, no matter what corpus you're looking at. Most of these items of information are specific to a particular corpus, but two of them you will always find, no matter how many or how few other items there are. And those two are, firstly, the text identification label, or the text ID as we sometimes call it for short, which is the label for the file that you will have seen here in the concordance screen. And this is the code, if you like, that CQPweb uses for this particular text throughout the interface. Then the last one is also found everywhere for all corpora, and that's the number of words in the text. So we can see that this is a 325,000 word text, so rather long. All the other fields here, we call these fields of information, depend on the particular corpus. They depend on what particular items of information are made available for all texts in this particular corpus. And this is something that system administrators have to set up when they create a corpus in CQPweb. So these are the fields that we dug out of the original files for this corpus and put into a database so that in the CQPweb interface these can be accessed. Now, why is it important to understand this? It's important to understand this because it will help you understand why there are actually two types of field here. One type of field contains usually very short values, and this is what is called a categorization. A categorization or classification sets up a division in the corpus. It distinguishes certain categories of text from others. So, for instance, this field here, the decade field in the Early English Books Online corpus, is a classification field. It distinguishes texts into different categories based on what decade they were originally published in. And you can see here that the decade category is 1700 to 1709. Now, classification fields have certain properties. Firstly, they will tend to have fairly short labels, as you see here. Secondly, every text must have a value here, and there will always be a finite set of values for any classification field. So let's say it's a classification field where there are 10 categories. There will be a finite set of 10 values that can occur here, and those are all the values that you're ever going to get for that particular classification field. In the case of decade, in this particular corpus, there are well more than 10. There are about 25 or so, I think, maybe more. Point is, though, that whatever the number is, it's a finite number. There is a fixed set of things that can occur, and every indifferent value here sets up a particular category of texts. And these categories of text can be found elsewhere in the CQPweb interface, for example in the distribution interface or in the subcorpus creation interface, in all these different places, which I'm not going to talk about right now. The other type of metadata field is what we call a free field. And a free field is a field that can contain anything. And that's often used for bits of information that are going to be different for every single text. Now, obviously, if something can be different for every single text, you can't use that to set up categories, because you would end up with one category for every single text, because every text is different. So for instance, title is a very straightforward example of a free field. It could be almost anything. The title of a book or title of another text could be, there's no limit to the number of different things it could be. Here it's the reasonableness and certainty of the Christian religion, which is the type of thing that people wrote books about in the 1600s and 1700s. There is no other text in the corpus that has that title. There are plenty of other texts that are in this decade, but there are no other texts that have that title. So free fields can have anything in them, and they are typically used for things that differ very widely from text to text. So you can see lots of these. So for example, keyword terms or ID numbers from certain different bibliographic schemes, the publisher, the author, the notes. These are all things that are going to be unique to this particular text, whereas the decade that it was published in is not unique, the quarter century it was published in is not unique, half century, century, ditto. So these are classification fields, and these are free text fields. Now, how do you know which is which? Well, remember that we have the hover here. In the hover, you'll see that only the classification fields appear, right? So that's the difference between what you see when you hover versus what you see on this screen. In the hover, you just see the classifications. In the metadata screen, you see the free fields as well. So, having explained the idea of the text metadata, in other parts of this series of tutorials, we'll make reference to this idea of different types of data that are available for every text in the corpus, and particularly talking about classifications and the categories within them. These are important concepts in CQPweb. And that's the end of this tutorial, and so I shall stop talking.